Our story begins on Naboo as Obi Wan Kenobi is hanging on for dear life inside of the plasma reactor hole. His master, Qui-Gon Jinn, has just been stabbed and is dying outside of this hole, and Obi Wan in this moment makes a choice. He can feel the power inside of him just to get out of here and kill the Sith Lord, but he isn't sure he can access it without touching a side of the Force that he has long been taught to ignore. It was a darkness, and it always lived deep within Obi-Wan, but with Qui-Gon dying and the Sith trying to end Obi-Wan's life, he did call upon a bit of the dark side to leap out of here, bring Qui-Gon's lightsaber to his hands, and kill the Sith Lord. And it felt good. Obi-Wan felt powerful, but he had to shake this off and run over to his master. Unfortunately, Qui-Gon was already dead. He passed on without being able to make Obi-Wan promise to train Anakin, and Obi-Wan fell to his knees in anger and sadness, promising himself he would never be so weak again. He could feel the dark side, and Obi-Wan knew that with that extra power, he certainly would have been able to save Qui-Gon, but the Jedi always refused to let him access it. Obi-Wan suddenly had to shake his head, remind himself that he is a Jedi. These thoughts are wrong, and after a while, Kenobi gathered himself to go find Anakin and the Queen. And all the way on Coruscant, news of Qui-Gon and Darth Maul's death reached the Jedi and the Senate, and the Council was preparing to head to Naboo for the funeral. But deep in the Coruscant industrial sector, former Jedi Master Dooku stood over the fallen body of Master Yaddle. She followed him into the Sith lair, and Dooku had to kill her. Darth Sidious now made Dooku his true Sith apprentice, gifting him the name Darth Tyrannus, but Dooku couldn't shake the feeling of anger, of betrayal. He'd emphasized with Sidious more than a few times that Qui-Gon could be an excellent ally for their cause, but Sidious denied it every time, and now Qui-Gon was dead. Dooku was discouraged by this. He was also shaken by how quickly Sidious moved on from Maul, and he wondered, when the time comes, will the same happen to him? And so, when Sidious said he was going to the funeral on Naboo, Dooku decided he did also want to say his final goodbyes to Qui-Gon, and he too would go to Naboo for the funeral. And once on Naboo, Dooku would take his seat facing Palpatine, and as Qui-Gon's body burned, Dooku could feel something, a spark from someone so small that only someone with a deep connection to them would feel it. Dooku wondered what it could be. He looked through the fire, and he saw Obi-Wan. The young Jedi, trained by Qui-Gon, was the closest Jedi to Dooku in terms of master lineage, and as Dooku looked over at Obi-Wan, the fire was reflecting in his eyes and giving away the spark that Dooku felt was Kenobi. And in this moment, Dooku had an idea. If Qui-Gon wouldn't be able to join him, then the student that Qui-Gon trained would work to take his place. Dooku wanted to rebuild the Republic, to make a new system from the ground up, but he couldn't truly trust the Sith to do it with him. So Dooku would use Sidious until it was no longer necessary. And when the funeral ended, all of the Jedi were mingling among Naboo politicians, preparing for the victory celebration in the morning, and Obi-Wan separated himself. He just wasn't feeling like himself. He walked down to the lake where the moonlight was shining enough to see everything, and Obi-Wan just stared into the lake. He wondered what was next in his life. Qui-Gon was gone. Anakin had asked him what was next for him, and Obi-Wan wasn't sure about that at all. He surely couldn't be the one to train young Skywalker. Obi-Wan considered leaving the Order for the woman he loved on Mandalore, but through it all, he felt the dark side still tugging at him, and right on cue, a strong voice from behind Obi-Wan said he would like to speak with him. Obi-Wan turned, and he saw Dooku, and Obi-Wan could see the same burning desire for more in Dooku's eyes that Obi-Wan held, and a small smile began to form on Dooku's mouth as he realized this was going to work. Around 1 year later, Dooku and Obi-Wan were officially partners in the shadows of the galaxy. Not long after the funeral, Obi-Wan told the Council he was leaving the Jedi Order. This came as a bit of surprise, but Obi-Wan held a lot of resentment towards the Jedi for not doing more when Qui-Gon warned them about the return of the Sith. The Council members and other Jedi throughout the temple laughed at Qui-Gon, telling Obi-Wan his master always had such an intense imagination. And after all of that, he was dead. It wasn't hard for Obi-Wan to leave the Order, especially after Dooku told him everything about how corrupt the Republic truly is. The Chancellor is a Sith Lord, and the Jedi don't even have a clue about it. Obi-Wan left the Order. He traveled to Mandalore, reuniting with Satine, but this would also be where he trained in the dark side of the Force. Obi-Wan began a life with Satine, and she was too busy to notice when Obi-Wan would sneak off to learn from Dooku in the shadows of Mandalore. It was a tough balancing act, but both Obi-Wan and Dooku were determined to make this work, and during all of this, Palpatine was pulling the strings of the Republic. Palpatine didn't know about Obi-Wan's turn to the dark side. It was Dooku's biggest secret, and one he was determined to keep a secret. As for Skywalker, the council debated for a long time about what to do with him, but ultimately, Grandmaster Yoda took it upon himself to train the boy. With Dooku gone, Qui-Gon dead, and Obi-Wan gone, Yoda wanted to restart his lineage of training Jedi, and that would begin with this chosen one, especially with the threat of the Sith always looming. And both Yoda and Anakin would learn to work well together. As the years began to pass by, Skywalker and Kenobi would descend further down their different paths. Perhaps in some alternate reality, the two of them would have been friends, but in this galaxy, Obi-Wan's descent into darkness went further and further every single day. And as the galaxy was becoming more divided, Duchess Satine of Mandalore was spending more and more time in political meetings, helping form a coalition of neutral systems separate from the Republic and the forming CIS. And this, combined with Obi-Wan's secret training, fractured the relationship between Kenobi and Kryze. After months of frustration, they decided to take a break from seeing each other, and these emotions would help fuel Obi-Wan's continued path to becoming a true Darkside warrior. And on one of the training sessions between Dooku and Obi-Wan, the two Darksiders would notice someone was watching them. It was Jedi Master Coleman Kaj, as he was here to negotiate with Satine and the Mandalorians into accepting Republic aid despite remaining neutral. But when his meeting ended, Kaj sensed Dooku's presence, and he followed his senses down into the sewer system until he heard the echoes of lightsabers. Obi-Wan was sparring with Dooku, and he was keeping up with success, but when the two of them spotted Coleman, they knew he had to be dealt with, one way or another. Coleman stepped into the dark area used for training Obi-Wan, and he asked exactly what was going on. He of course noticed Dooku's red lightsaber, and Coleman knew what this meant, so he ignited his own green blade, telling the Jedi he must bring them to the Council. Dooku said this was not an option, and he looked to Kenobi, telling his apprentice that this was his first true test. Kill the Jedi, and he will truly become a Sith. Obi-Wan didn't even realize how badly he wanted that until now, so he ignited his blue blade, and he began running at Coleman, who held up his green saber and prepared for this fight. Their lightsabers were clashing with a strong sound that echoed through the Mandalore sewers. The battle immediately intense, both Jedi and Darksider exchanging powerful strikes, as Coleman was still grappling with what was going on. His experience as a Jedi Master was showing in every parry and block, but Obi-Wan, despite his fall to the dark side, was still a master of his lightsaber form. It was tight, impenetrable, deflecting Coleman's attacks with apparent ease, and he made adjustments to this defensive form, using the dark side to make every block wear down the opponent. But Coleman just pressed harder, his lightsaber becoming a blur of green energy, darting around Obi-Wan's defenses, finding small gaps in his form, and for a while, the fight was even, neither of them able to grab the upper hand. Their sabers were clashing again and again, sparks flying around as the sounds of their duel reverberated through the dark area. Obi-Wan gritted his teeth, his anger growing as Coleman managed to land a few blows, testing his defenses. And suddenly, Coleman spotted an opening in Obi-Wan's form. Seizing this opportunity with a swift swing, he was able to disarm Obi-Wan, sending his blue saber spinning across the floor as the hilt cracked open. Obi-Wan was thrown hard into the wall, and his head was dizzy as he looked up. Obi-Wan saw Dooku's disappointed face, and in desperation, he reached deep into the dark side, his eyes flashing with fury as he raised his hands, and Coleman moved in to strike him down. For the first time, lightning crackled from Kenobi's fingertips, and the blue tendrils of energy surged into the Jedi Master, forcing him back, sending Coleman writhing in pain. Obi-Wan wasted no more time. He called his broken lightsaber hilt back to his hand, now smoldering and sparking, and fueled by rage, he poured dark energy into it, bleeding the Kyber crystal red in a single instant. As Coleman struggled to recover, Obi-Wan flipped through the air, and with a powerful strike, he decapitated the Jedi Master, then dropped to his knees in front of Dooku, breathing heavily, eyes glowing yellow. Dooku nodded approvingly, a faint smile crossing his lips, and he told his new apprentice that he has done well, and finally he has found it within himself to use his true powers. He was officially a Sith, and Obi-Wan thanked his master, asking what is their next mission. Dooku knew the rule of two meant there could only be a Sith master and a Sith apprentice, and so the next phase of his grand plan was simple: eliminate the master and take the role for himself. At this point in the galaxy, the Confederacy of Independent Systems had formed, and it was about ready to emerge into the galaxy. It had been roughly 7 years since Qui-Gon died, and there were still millions of battle droids ready to go at this very moment. With Obi-Wan by his side, Dooku could completely take over this grand plan, and the time for that was now. And on Coruscant, Darth Sidious was waiting in the Sith lair for Dooku. The two of them were set to meet to discuss the final preparations to bring the Republic into war, but as Dooku arrived, Sidious could sense he was not alone, and out of his ship walked Obi Wan Kenobi, former Jedi Knight. Sidious found this to be extremely strange and intriguing, and he asked Dooku why he was here. Without waiting another second, Dooku would ignite his lightsaber, telling Sidious that his time was over. He's put everything into place, and now the CIS will take over, led by him and Kenobi. And Obi-Wan ignited his own red blade, without saying a word. Sidious looked from Dooku to Kenobi, and decided he will have to kill Kenobi to show Dooku who is still in charge. Clearly, he has not been tough enough on his apprentice. So Sidious pulled out two blades, and he sprinted at the two of them, leaping into the air, swinging his own blades around in a mad circle of red light. The clashing red blades illuminated the dark lair, as the three Sith slithered around the room, fighting like the Sith of old. Obi-Wan, consumed by the dark side, moved with a perfect defense besides Count Dooku. His crimson blade arced with ferocity, each strike heavier than the last, channeling the raw aggression of his Sith fighting style. Dooku was always poised and elegant in battle, but still extremely ferocious, and he complemented Obi-Wan perfectly. Their coordination was lethal, the air crackling with dark energy, as they drove Sidious from different angles, a relentless onslaught of fury and grace as they sought to take over the galaxy themselves. But Sidious was the most dangerous Sith in centuries. He met their attacks with a speed and power that any normal person would struggle to even see with their eyes. His own blood-red blade whirled through the air, matching the intensity of Obi-Wan's savage blows and Dooku's thrusts. The Sith Lord's movements were fluid, almost otherworldly, as he parried, countered, his dark robes swirling around him like a shadow. The room was vibrating with the force of their battle, and Obi-Wan pressed forward, his strikes filled with the rage and hatred that now fueled him, determined to bring Sidious down. And a sudden surge of force lightning bursted from Sidious's fingertips, crackling towards them. Obi-Wan blocked with his lightsaber, the red blade absorbing the blue tendrils, but the sheer power of Sidious's attack forced him to stumble backwards. But Dooku quickly moved to Obi-Wan's side, and at once, they both put their blades to their sides and shot their own lightning at Sidious together. The blue lightning from Sidious slammed hard into the lightning from Dooku and Kenobi, and the two Sith poured everything they had into their lightning. It carved through Sidious's tendrils, and their combined power struck the Dark Lord. He was slammed hard into the far wall. Sidious struggled to get to his feet, and Dooku and Kenobi used more lightning now, and they tore Sidious apart with it, leaving only a charred robe where the former Sith Master once stood, and the plans for the Sith would only accelerate from here. With the fall of Darth Sidious, Count Dooku, now the true Dark Lord of the Sith, stood beside his apprentice Obi-Wan Kenobi here on Coruscant, ready to seize control of the galaxy that has no idea that a new Sith regime is rising, and Dooku's mind is already set on his next moves. Through his secret channels, Dooku would call upon the vast separatist fleet that's hidden away in the shadows of the galaxy. Battle droids, warships, legions of fighters prepared to execute his orders. His command was simple but rather devastating. Strike the heart of the Republic army before the Republic even knows about it. Kamino, the birthplace of the clones that Dooku himself created. Within hours, separatist warships would descend upon Kamino. The planet, unsuspecting and defenseless, was soon completely overwhelmed as waves of battle droids poured from orbiting vessels. The cloning facilities would fall swiftly under the droids' merciless assault. Clones in various stages of their creation were eradicated before they could fully realize their potential. The sky above Tipoca City darkened with the smoke of destruction as Dooku's forces reduced the planet to ruin. His message was clear. There will be no reinforcements for the Republic. The clone army, built to divide the galaxy, was no longer necessary. Dooku was going to take over immediately. He didn't need to wait for Palpatine. And at the same time, Dooku launched his most bold move yet. Coruscant, the Republic's beating heart. The Separatist fleet, now fully mobilized, emerged from hyperspace above the capital. And together, Dooku and Kenobi would fly up to the flagship. Dooku's ultimatum rang across the galaxy: surrender to the CIS, or be destroyed. And the Republic's forces would scramble in panic, unprepared for any attack of this magnitude. Of course, they knew of the formation of the CIS, but no one ever expected this. And to make matters worse, the Chancellor was missing. Dooku would receive messages from both the Senate and the Jedi, telling him they will not surrender. But Dooku still had one trick. He sent in undeniable proof of Palpatine, the hero and heart of the Republic, conspiring against them to take over the Republic. Dooku showed the galaxy that Palpatine was not only working against the Senate politically, but also working against the Jedi as a Sith Lord. With no army to protect them, no means of resistance, and morale completely crushed by learning the truth about Palpatine, the Senate and Jedi were left with no choice but to surrender. Across the city planet, alarms blared as Separatist droids descended upon the surface, securing key installations and government buildings without a single shot fired. Dooku, the new upcoming Sith Emperor, would enter the Senate chamber with his apprentice, Obi Wan Kenobi, at his side. The once proud Senate, a symbol of democratic governance, would now belong to their new rulers. Dooku, his demeanor calm and calculated, assumed control of his galaxy with very little resistance. The senators, many of them complicit in the Republic's corruption, could only watch as their power dissolved in an instant. Dooku's vision for the galaxy was clear. The old, rotting Republic would be replaced by a new order, free of the bureaucracy and corporate greed that held poisoned it for so long. The Jedi, powerless without risking the lives of so many, were ordered into exile. Rather than wipe them out as Darth Sidious had intended, Dooku and Obi-Wan decreed that the Jedi Order would be banished to the Outer Rim, far from the political center of the galaxy, as they could not stop the Sith from rising to power. They were forbidden from interfering in galactic affairs, reduced to protectors of the often forgotten worlds. The once vibrant temple on Coruscant was now empty, halls echoing with the absence of the Force's guardians. The Jedi, including Yoda and Anakin Skywalker among thousands of others, were soon gone for good. And as Dooku solidified his rule over Coruscant, he swiftly dismantled the corrupt systems that had long plagued the Senate. Corporations that once had a stranglehold on the galaxy's resources were stripped of their influence. Trade routes that had been monopolized for profit were open to all, allowing the Outer Rim and Mid-Rim planets to thrive in ways they never had under the Republic before. Dooku and Obi-Wan implemented policies that redistributed wealth and power to the impoverished sectors, ensuring that those who'd been oppressed under the old regime would finally have a voice. The galactic bureaucracy was streamlined, cutting through layers of inefficiency. Systems that had been long neglected were given the attention that they deserved. Emperor Dooku ruled with a strict but fair hand. His vision of order was enforced through the power of the Separatist droid army, at least for now. And under his rule, there was no room for the corruption that had once been rampant in the Senate. Senators who had abused their power were removed or arrested, replaced by appointed officials who were selected based on merit rather than wealth or influence. Obi-Wan, serving as Dooku's second-in-command, oversaw much of the galaxy's internal affairs, and he even didn't fully come back to the light, but began to at least somewhat abandon the darkness, as senators like Padme Amidala and Bail Organa helped Obi-Wan see the path to peace was not fully in the dark side. And together, the two Sith would rule not with terror, but with a calculated sense of balance and fairness that the galaxy could only achieve by Republic surrender. Though many feared the new regime at first, the galaxy slowly began to change for the better. Crime syndicates which had flourished in the chaos of the Republic were crushed under the weight of Dooku's iron will. Trade thrived, the galaxy experienced an unprecedented era of economic prosperity. Under Dooku's reign, peace was no longer a fleeting hope, but it was a reality, maintained through the strict order of the Separatist fleet. And the Jedi, now scattered across the Outer Rim, would find themselves disconnected from the central galaxy they'd once sworn to protect. They continued their missions as peacekeepers, but their influence was a shadow of what it had once been. Yoda, Anakin, and a few remaining Jedi Masters did leave small enclaves, guiding young Padawans far from the Empire's gaze. They understood the necessity of their exile, knowing that the galaxy needed stability, but they did remain watchful over the galaxy, waiting for the day they might be called upon again, back into the core worlds. They knew that someday perhaps they would have to fight back. But over time, the galaxy would come to accept Dooku as Emperor, and Obi-Wan as his negotiations enforcer. The Sith had succeeded where the Republic had failed. Dooku's empire, free of corruption and inefficiency, thrived in a way that few had imagined possible, and this rule would go on for many years. And folks, that is where our story ends today. It's very open for a part 2. This was one I had, I don't want to say trouble, but many different paths of where this could go, many different tendrils, just different, I don't know, ideas. This is one that could have gone billions of different ways, honestly, well, that's not true, but a lot of different ways. So, ultimately decided on not having an all-out Clone War. I thought, hey, Dooku in the movies, original one, just wants to follow Sidious's plan, but with the hope of Obi-Wan here, he's like, we don't need the clone army. I have an entire Separatist droid army. Let's just wipe everything out and just take over. So, yeah, that's what we did today. Hope you guys enjoyed. I always like doing Dooku stories. Obi-Wan's always fun. So, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.